So let me begin getting started with AWS Cloud. Uh, the agenda is going to be quite long, so let's try and see how much we can cover in the while. But it's going to be why AWS, or what is cloud, why AWS as a cloud. The second one is going to be, the cloud adoption journey of customers. So because the reason, I know most of you may not be actually customers of AWS, but see, we are doing this. We are building the developer community because we want to get jobs that will work on AWS cloud, right? Or we want to do something about our careers with respect to AWS. So if you don't know how the service is consumed by our customers, you may not be able to tune yourself, right? That's why you need to know how AWS customers are using the cloud, so you can work towards making getting skilled up and be able to, move ahead in your career. Then we will talk about the AWS global infrastructure. We will have a very high level view of the products and services. I do want to talk to you about your first hour on AWS. There is lots of training available online. Mr. Anjani also mentioned about them being able to provide training. There's lots of content, lots of workshops, hands-on training. I've listed a lot of these things where you can have one stop and find all this information. And I'll also run through a sample tutorial. But I wanted to give you some pointers as to, what can you do once you get an AWS account? What are the few important things that you need to do in the first hour of getting that account? Okay, because this information, trust me, you won't find it anywhere. This information comes with lots of years of working with a lot of customers, getting into a pain point, and then going back, right? So just bear with me till we reach there. So without further ado, I'll just quickly walk you through introduction to cloud and AWS. So what is cloud computing? So by definition, it means, refers to any on-demand delivery of IT resources and applications via the internet with a pay-as-you-go pricing. If I had to explain this to my mother, the easiest thing I would say is, Mom, cloud is like electricity. Uh, like how I go ahead, if I want to charge my phone, I plug it in, I switch it on, I start getting electricity, the units start getting counted, and I switch off because I don't want to charge anymore. Switch off, the units stop getting counted. In the end of the month, the total units that I've accumulated or I've used up, I only pay for that, right, on a certain rate. The same way, if I need a virtual server, I need a storage, I need some kind of global networking, I need some databases or AI or machine learning services, right? I can just use them on a pay as you go basis, sitting at home over the internet, and that's it. And if I don't need it, I can just shut it off, and it's gone, right? That's as simple as that I can explain to my mother, and I think she does get that after 6 years, that okay, my daughter is doing something with cloud, right? So why do customers migrate to cloud is definitely before cloud. So I have been working on the AWS tech for more than a decade now. And before that, I remember we used to have these, rooms specifically insulated, and a lot of cooling that had to be done. And you had to actually write a purchase order to, procure these racks of servers and, storage and networking and cabling and whatnot. You should come in and then install it, and install the whole thing, and that would take months because it takes a lot of work and it's a lot of money to actually do all that process, right? And with cloud now, if I want to access a virtual machine of, let's say, 10 vc sorry 16 vcpu and 256 GB, I just have to do 5 minutes of, like, click click click, and then within 5 minutes I will have a machine, right? That's why we say that the time spent has been lowered, the risk from expense to flexible expense, because now I don't have to write a purchase order, I don't have to wait for months, and then if something goes wrong or if I don't need that machine, what do I do with it? There is, like, do I return it? Then what kind of a loss I'm bearing? All these questions are being sorted out, right? And you can now concentrate more on what you want to actually build from a business perspective, rather than just creating the whole infrastructure and then work on your whole business application and then post it, right? So it just takes away that undue heavy lifting from you, right? Undifferentiated heavy lifting from you. And definitely now that you have more time, you can give those people time to innovate or do something new, and that can actually help the business again, rather than just doing a repetitive task somewhere. And definitely go global in minutes, because now cloud infrastructure will see that is available globally. So now you can easily spin up servers in any part of the world, and if you want to serve them in that particular area itself, in that locale or in that geography, you can do that just sitting maybe from India. You can work with customers in US, right? Or Nepal for that sense. So what is AWS? So AWS is a cloud, yes, and it does provide you a broad and a deep platform. So what we mean is there are a lot of services, a lot of Lego blocks for you to play with and build your solution, and and these services are deep as well, right? So each service will have lots of features and lots of things available within that service itself, right? So it's a broad and a deep platform to help our customers build sophisticated, scalable, and secure applications. Okay, that's from a definition perspective. I would have loved to go through the Amazon story, but I don't want to take a lot of time. But AWS came about, from its experience of building an infrastructure for Amazon.com, and we started giving those services out to other customers so that other customers can build their applications on the platform. And if you see, we have so many customers now. First we used to have Amazon.com, and this was in-house, and then we gave it out, and now we have so many customers using the cloud and benefiting from it, right? So quickly, why do customers choose AWS, right? The first one is definitely agility, because now you don't have to be worried about how many machines you have to think about. You don't have to guess about the capacity. You can just quickly get some virtual machines, start experimenting. If it doesn't work, just switch it off and give it back. This is why cloud benefited a lot of startups, because startups, if you understand that they have an idea, they want to build something, but they may not necessarily have a lot of funding to begin with, right? What they have to do is they have to build something up, showcase it to someone, so that they will then invest in them. And that's where cloud came in, because at a cheaper scale, at a cheaper price, you could have a small scale application ready, showcase it. If it sounds promising, someone will invest in it, and then you can start scaling it or add more features as you go, right? Cost savings, that's where we saying only pay for what you use, lower upfront expenses, elasticity, stop guessing capacity. If you think, as an example, I run a company which only has campaigns that run 3 months in the whole year. I don't need to buy servers or machines for that, right? I can just go to the cloud, rent those machines for 3 months, run my campaigns, do whatever I need to do to generate revenue, shut it down, and the rest of the year I don't need to pay a penny to anyone, right? For running that infrastructure for just 3 months. Definitely innovate faster, because now you're focusing on your business more than infrastructure. Go global in minutes. Definitely will see the global cloud infrastructure, and service breadth and depth. We already talked about that, right? Uh, Typically, if I have to talk about AWS customers and their journey, uh, they do begin with a project phase, right? So everyone wants to do one project. They will vet the cloud, they will evaluate, oh, do we like these features? Is it helping our business? How's the costing looking? Is there any hidden cost? And they want to see all of that, right? And it's fair. Everyone needs to, we have to do some kind of POC, proof of concept, to begin with, right? So they begin with a project phase. Once they identify, okay, this makes sense, AWS makes sense to us, we want to go ahead with AWS, and they will say any new project that begins on in our application should go on AWS, right? And that's how people start with the foundational phase, right? And then they go into a migration phase. Now they'll be like, we had some of the customers would have something running on-prem already, right? They have their own data centers that may be decommissioning. They want to move that to the cloud, so they do get into a migration phase. And then they come to a modernization phase. Most customers do a lift and shift, not a really a best practice when if you want to utilize the all the features and use cloud in the best possible way. But time and this is how it is type. So people do lift and shift, lots of people do lift and shift, and then they go ahead and modernize the application, which is fine as well. Not every application can be modernized and then moved. There are a lot of times, a lot of constraints that people just want to move quickly, or just want to start quickly, and they do a lift and shift, so that's fine. And then they do modernization. For example, someone wants to move from Windows to Linux, or they have been using some old old database, and they want to migrate it to a new or open source database, could be done. And then comes the continuous reinvention. Quickly, if you want to see we have a broadest customer base. It's within startups, within enterprises across the globe. You can also see there's a lot of customers in the public sector as well, and definitely system integrators and independent software vendors as well. I won't talk a lot about partner network. I think Anjani talked a lot about how they, as partners, helping our customers. Definitely, we have a lot of partners across the world, and we are really happy to have Genesee in Nepal, supporting our customers move to the cloud, or be on the cloud, be be successful on the cloud itself. And last but not the least, there is something called as AWS Marketplace. Now, see, AWS cannot build solution or a software or a service for everything that we need, right? The IT market is so huge; it's across so many domains. There are so many things that we require in the daily way. AWS is not going to be able to do everything, right? So what we have is something called as a marketplace, where you have one-click deployment of the products that are already available. A lot of customers are used to a lot of software, and they want to continue using that on the cloud. And that's how, using the marketplace, it can be made very easy. For example, you're looking at, I use Red Hat operating system. AWS by default doesn't give me Red Hat operating system. What do? Go to the marketplace. CentOS, go to the marketplace. So you could do all these things. Or you want an antivirus, just go and search for the antivirus on the marketplace, and just say deploy, and it should be deployed in your account, right? So let me quickly run you through the AWS global infrastructure. Sorry. Initially, we for the first 5 years we had 4 regions across the world, and you can see it's a good spread across the world. And we saw a lot of pickup, on the demand for AWS, and we had launched 7 regions in the next 5 years. After that, since 2016 till 2020, we have actually launched 13 new regions and 1 local region. And we have also announced 3 regions, right? So these are regions that are going to come soon, in the near future, right? So if you have to see the global infrastructure, let me just use my pointer. If you see the global infrastructure, and if you want to specifically focus on Asia Pacific, in Asia Pacific, you can see that we have, Singapore, Sydney, Mumbai, Hong Kong. And if you see what is in the bracket, it's the availability zones that each of the region has it. Now, while I have mentioned these terms, let me also talk about what a region and availability zone means. And this is very important, right? Because I do a lot of interviews with AWS, right? And a lot of people don't really understand what are AZs, what are regions, and why do we need these. And you need to understand this concept if you are going to do any certification from AWS, right? Because multiple availability zone is a best practice that is asked almost everywhere. Okay, so let's try and understand what AZs are. It can be one or more data centers. Okay, an AZ is a cluster of one or more data centers, and a region is a cluster of one or more availability zones. Okay, so availability zone is a cluster of multiple data centers, and 2 or more availability zones form a region. Why do you need this? Think of when you're hosting your application, right? When you're hosting your application, instead of, you have to keep asking this question to yourself. Instead of one big box, can I break that box into two and host it in two different availability zones? Why? Because each availability zone has redundant power supply, redundant internet. They are separate from each other. So for example, there is any outage or there is flooding in one of the availability zones of AWS, your application will still continue to run, maybe in a degraded manner from the other availability zone, right? Now, why I'm saying degraded manner? Because you went 50%, right? Now there are ways to overcome this as well. There are services like auto scaling, where you could tell auto scaling, I always want minimum two virtual machines to be running, and these are the two availability zones that I'm using. Now, if one of the availability zones is failing, auto scaling will automatically understand, okay, if there is some issue for me creating instances in this availability zone, it will start spawning the desired number, that is the two or more, in the other working availability zone. And this helps you with reliability. This will help you make highly available, highly fault tolerant, and scalable applications, right? So now you have two different data centers or two different clusters of data centers to work with. And hope that gets cleared. Then there is something called as edge locations and direct connect locations. I won't spend a lot of time because then you have to understand. If you understand content delivery networks, you will definitely understand what are edge locations. These are points of presence across the world, POPs, that we call points of presence across the world, where you could use these points of presence for caching and serving your static content. And CDN also does static and dynamic. Okay, many people forget, oh, CDN, content delivery network, will only do static. No, CloudFront actually helps you with dynamic content as well. And lastly, there are direct connect locations. Now, to explain it in an easy way, see, when we are accessing the cloud over the internet, it's okay, it's good for most of the applications. But it can so happen that there are applications who want a dedicated bandwidth, or who want to securely access the AWS cloud without going through the latencies that internet plays, right? So internet has different latencies. It could hop from one place to another, but I want a direct route to the AWS cloud. Is there a way to do that? Yes, you buy something called as a direct connect line. It's like a leased MPLS line that you can purchase, and you can have a direct route to the AWS cloud. So it could be AWS cloud, and you could have an on-premise data center, or it just could be your office location where all your developers and everyone needs to access the applications to the cloud, right? So quickly we'll go through the products and services. Okay, so don't get scared about this diagram. I'll help you understand and walk you through the whole image itself, right? It's just to show you how broad and how deep the functionalities are. So look at the pointer. We talked about infrastructure, we talked about regions, availability zones, and points of presence, right? So that is the base infrastructure that cloud needs to run, right? That is owned by AWS, maintained by AWS, and provided to you by AWS, right? Then there are these core services. Think of five core services and security, right? So if you're preparing for any examination, if you're getting started with AWS, if you want to say you understand AWS, please always focus on these core services. I'm not saying everything else is not useful. Everything else is, the managed services are built on these core services. So you have to understand these core services at least up to a 200 300 level, so that you can interact with these core services to be able to work with the other managed services, right? So the first one is compute services, compute, storage, networking, databases, and security, right? So today I'll just show you the compute layer itself, so you'll get an understanding that how big these sections can be. But compute is nothing but your virtual machines, your containers that need to run on some kind of servers, or even serverless technologies as well, or load balancers or auto scaling, those kind of I know I'm giving you a lot of names or terms. If you're not used to it, bear with me, I may show a few of them, and I'll point you to where you can learn about these more. Then storage could be, there are different type of storage facilities we have. Like you could have storage for block storage, you could have object storage, you could have storage for archival, depending on where your data needs to be stored from hot to cold, there is a service available for you. Okay. Then the third thing is networking, right? We are working in the cloud, we are working in virtual machines, we need to have some kind of networking as our base, right? For our virtual machines to talk to each other, or our services to talk to each other, right? So VPC, like virtual private cloud, it's like an isolation. I'll definitely have an example, so I'll talk about it then. But VPC, Direct Connect, or any DNS provider, that would become your networking part, right? Databases, uh, we have the typical SQL, NoSQL databases as managed services. We also have managed services for time stream databases, for graph databases, and few more that I may not be able to recollect right now. And last but not the least, and the very important thing is security, right? So we have a lot of services with respect to security, and with my your first hour on AWS, I'll try to dab into a few important aspects about security as well. So these are the core services. You have security, and everything else is built on the basic core platform of AWS, right? So you have a lot of services from AWS that can help you with management tools, that will help you with analytics or DevOps or IoT or with machine learning. Suman has a session later on after this, so he will take you through the whole AI ML portfolio of AWS. And if you don't find anything here, um, these are not service names, these are just categories of what kind of services we have. uh, there is also a marketplace, so if you don't find anything, go ahead, search in the marketplace. And about that, I think that's purple. If you find any issues, there is also something like AWS provides us a support. It's like a paid or free kind support that you can get. If you are, he can also get training and certification team. There's a whole partner ecosystem that Genesee is part of. There is an account management team. So if you are a customer of AWS and you want to reach out to AWS directly, you want to work with the sales team or a solution architect team, like I used to be a solution architect. I used to work directly with my customers, help them with architectures and applications, etc. That team is also available. You can go ahead and fill the contact us form or reach out to Genesee and or me or Suman, and we should be able to connect you there, right? Uh, so quickly, I'll run you through the compute platform. The first thing is you have to understand compute is not just virtual machines, right? So compute can be virtual machines, containers platform, the latest and greatest Docker containers and other kind of container orchestration layers that you can run. And the last one is Lambda, which is part of our serverless framework. From instances, now notice I'm not saying just EC2 instances, I'm saying there is services like RDS, or there is services like Elastic Cache, where you could find the name as instances. So what instances means is any kind of virtual servers in the cloud, right? And it could be EC2, which is the base of everything else, or it could be RDS, or it could be Elasticsearch as well. And if you see, we have a lot of choices when you have to start with instances. The reason you have choices is because not all applications are built same. Applications have a different kind of requirements, and that's why there are so many different categories. There are so many different capabilities if you want, and a lot of different options, like 275 plus instance types. You, if you're starting on cloud, if you're a developer, if you just want to experiment, I would suggest you start with something like called as a T2.micro. Okay. I'll tell you why T2.micro, but it's a very tiny machine that is good for, there is a machine tinier than that, but I suggest T2.micro if you want to just play around, see, or install something, and just get the feel of what AWS cloud is. If you want to see the container landscape that AWS has, the first thing is, if you know Docker Hub, that is a public container registry. You can have your own private container registry of your containers, and something called as Amazon Elastic Container Registry. In short, ECR. You can host your Docker containers on EC2, that is the virtual servers, or you could host it in a service called as Fargate. Fargate is part of our serverless stack. So what it means is, I have a container. This container needs a certain vCPU, it needs a certain RAM. You take this AWS, you run it for me. Okay, I don't need to be worried about, I don't want to worry about the infrastructure that he needs. How do I scale this thing? No, I'm giving it to you. I want my application to be accessed using this container. You run it at scale for me. And I'm okay to pay maybe a little bit of managed fee for it because I'm not worried about all of that. You take care of it. So there is a managed service for that as well. And last but not the least, orchestration layer. There are two platforms for orchestration layer: ECS, or Elastic Container Service. It has been here for 4 5 years now. Service is very mature in the sense, and it's easy to work with. So you could either go with ECS as a service, or you could go with EKS. So EKS is Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes. And EKS also has been in the market for more than a year or two, almost 2 years, I think. And it has matured since the day it has launched. And there's a lot of cool things you can do with EKS. You can have like master nodes, worker nodes. You can ask AWS to manage either of them or all of them. And you can integrate, if you already have a Kubernetes cluster running somewhere and you just want to integrate that with AWS, you can do that. A lot of cool things you can do. If you are interested to know more about these things, there's a workshop for each of them. So ECS and EKS, amazing workshops. A lot of work has been done to get these workshops up and running. So if you're a person like me who likes to play around and then learn rather than just listening to someone else, workshops are a great way, and it starts from beginner to advanced level. So a lot of things you can learn from here, or just use it as a cheat sheet. I don't know how to do this, just go to the workshop, find it and implement it, right? Then last but not the least, there is a serverless stack, right? So serverless, a lot of people just say, oh, Lambda, but compute or Lambda is just not what is serverless. Serverless is a lot more than Lambda, right? Lambda is included in. So there is a compute options. We talked about Lambda and Fargate. Lambda, if I have to tell you in a quick way, there is servers, right? For example, I have a website that runs 24 by 7. I would go ahead and pick a virtual machine, because that's what I've been doing. I'll pick up a virtual machine, I'll install my PHP web server, or Node.js web server, whatever kind of a web server I need to run. I'll install that, let it run 24 by 7. I'm good to go, right? I'm paying for it 24 by 7. But then there are applications, just to give you an example, for example, a cron job, right? Which runs maybe once in an hour every day. So once in an hour, that is 24 times, it's going to be invoked. It needs to go do certain work, run the code for maybe few milliseconds or few seconds, run the code, perform some activity, come back, go to sleep. Do I have to actually have a machine running 24 by 7 just so that a particular cron job can wake up once in an hour for few seconds and go back to sleep? It's a lot of wastage of money. And understand, cloud is here to save your money, right? So I'm still wasting a lot of money if I'm doing that on a EC2 server. Can I not move it to a service like Lambda, which can execute your code, and the amount of time your code is running, it will only charge you for that, right? So it will charge you for those few seconds or milliseconds that the code was running. There are a lot of other services like integration services. There are a lot of data store services that are form of the serverless stack, where how much ever you use it, you will only be charged for that, right? And because I have an example, I'm also going to touch base on databases. So I mentioned there are a lot of different types of databases. So you can see there are a lot of relational databases. There are few key value as in NoSQL as well, DocumentDB. Then you have in-memory caches, graph database, time series, and ledger databases that AWS provides, right? So you can go ahead, play with these databases. These are managed services. What we mean is, you don't have to worry about the installation. You don't have to worry about the backup and restore. You don't have, I mean, you have to, but it can automate the backup, right? You don't have to worry about the replication. Just one click, I want to replicate it, and it will have synchronous or asynchronous replication. So there are version control as well. You could say that, oh, new version of this software has come in. Do you want to auto upgrade it, or you want to wait to do that? So there are a lot of things that can be automated by the managed service, and you only have to worry about your data, about your database, right? uh, so let me quickly walk you through security. Now at AWS, what we mean by security is shared responsibility model. It's a shared responsibility. It's like AWS and you as a customer, we have a shared responsibility. So what we mean is AWS is responsible for all the global infrastructure we talked about, regions, availability zones, edge locations. We are responsible for that. We are responsible for the compute, database, storage, all these services that we are giving to you. We are responsible for that, right? What we mean, we are responsible. We are responsible of the physical security and the virtual security of these services. We'll work on the isolation of these services. We'll work on isolation of the networks and the hardware and the storage. That's our thing. You as a customer, anything, it's so if you're working on EC2, anything about an operating system is your responsibility. If you're working with a managed service, anything beyond a managed services, about the database engine, for example, is your responsibility. How you take care of your data, it's your responsibility. We are not saying that, oh, we don't take care of it. We give you the tools, but if you want to enable them, do you want to use these different tools, that is something that is your responsibility, because not every customer wants all kind of features, right? So to give you a perspective, a startup may say, oh, it's just a development thing, there's no data on it, we're just playing around, we don't want so much security, I want to give my developers a bit free hand and don't want encryption on all these things, so just let them build it. Fine, go ahead and build it. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you could find enterprises who would say, we have strict guidelines, we have strict policies, they need to have hardening, they need to have these features, we need to have encryption at rest and transit and blah blah blah, and these need to be available, right? So the AWS gives you the tools, you as a customer configure them. AWS also works with a lot of countries, regulations with a lot of countries, and works on the compliance controls across the globe, right? So there is a lot of work done to ensure that the cloud itself is secure for you. Now, let's come to the important part, right? You first are on AWS. So let's say you got a tutorial. I have few links. I have a tutorial as well. And great, you have an AWS account. If you joined in late, and if you're not, if you didn't get to hear Anjani, please check the Google form in the chat window. That has a Google form. You can fill it in if you need an AWS account. I think Anjani and Dilly and these guys would definitely love to look at it and help you with it. So we understand the situations there, and we want to help you out. So please reach out. If you are watching the recording and you don't know what to do, you don't have the Google form, please do reach out to the organizers on the meetup page, and they will definitely be in touch with you for any help you need, right? That's that done. Now if you are creating, there's a few tips that I want to share with you, right? So if you're creating for your personal use, yeah, go ahead, use your personal email ID to sign up for the account, that's fine. If you're using the AWS account for your company, right, as a best practice, I would suggest you to use a group email alias. Now why is that? Because let's say you say arvind@example.com, and Arvind is on holiday, or Arvind was terminated, or Arvind left the company, right? What happens to all those emails and notifications? And what if you want to log into your AWS account? How are you going to do it without Arvind's email ID? What you should ideally do is AWS admin@example.com. And in this alias, add all the administrators or your CTO into that group, so that if AWS is also sending some important emails, like something with respect to your account, with respect to your instances, or anything you're running on the cloud, that doesn't go, that doesn't get missed out. At least out of 4 people, 2 people will see that, right? Or one person will see that email and be alerted about it. So having a group email alias is important. Now I know there is a lot of challenge with account strategies and you're just getting started, but I've just kept it on the slide so that if in future you want to again hear me out or want to know what to do, you can look at these things. So first thing is create a new VPC. The default VPC is for testing only. Don't use it in production. If you're going to have something done for production, go ahead and create a new VPC. VPCs are free of cost, so you don't have to worry of how many you're creating. There may be a bit of a soft limit. You can easily raise that limit by reaching out to the support org. Um, but don't use the default limit. Now, a lot of customers of AWS will have one account. Now, there are different strategies, right? It depends on what you want to do. You could either have one account where you could dump everything in the default VPC, which is a bad practice. What you should ideally do is have one account, have different set of VPCs. One is a production VPC and one is a non-prod VPC. Okay, so at least in future you want to stop people from accessing the production VPC, you can have that access control. Some customers definitely want different accounts altogether, because for them they feel that they should know how much they're spending on production and how much they're spending on non-production accounts, right? So, and they don't want to work on that, oh, have I given access, have I not given access. Just keep it separate, keep it simple. Some customers, this happens majority in the enterprise world, well, they'll keep a separate security, a separate logging account, a separate sign in account where all the logs will go just to one account and a security team can keep monitoring. um, a lot of customers will use control tower or landing zone for these kind of facilities. And last but not the least, you could use organizations and consolidated billing. I'm not sure how that pans out in Nepal. To be honest, we will know as we proceed in the future, right? But there are different account related strategies. If you want to know more, feel free to reach out to me via any of the channels and I'll be happy to discuss more. How do you access AWS? Now you've got an account. How do I access it? Easy. First is you have an AWS management console, so you can always log into console, click, click, click. Easy to use, a console where you can just have few web pages or wizards to do a lot of stuff. You could have command line tools if you're a person who likes to work in Linux terminals or Mac terminals and you just want to have quick commands to work with the cloud. You can use that. If you're a person who likes IDEs, you can use the AWS Web Toolkits to access AWS as well. Software development kits. Now there are a lot of applications where you may need to integrate AWS APIs into your application directly. You can use the software development kits that's available in lots of languages today. So you can use that. Finally, infrastructure as code. If you've heard of terms like CloudFormation, Terraform, Ansible, you can write these templates, use infrastructure as code to do that. There is something new that AWS has launched recently, something called as CDK, which you can also use as infrastructure as code and access the AWS APIs. How to select the right region? Now that you've got an account, you've all set up, now you want to start using AWS, how do you do that? The first important thing you have to look for is definitely application latency. If my goal is to serve end customers, where are most of my end customers located? Are they based out of Asia? Are they based out of India, Nepal, and neighboring countries? Are they based out of like different places of the world? You need to understand which market you're targeting, because the closer you keep the region to the market, the internet latencies will be reduced, right? So the lower the latency, better user experience from that perspective. Second is there are a lot of compliance and data privacy laws. For example, financial institutions in India may have to follow certain data privacy laws, right? So they have to keep data in India itself. It cannot be kept outside. So you may have to follow certain guidelines. So if you're building an application, you're a startup, you are thinking of an idea, do check if you fall under any compliance or privacy laws and then take your decisions accordingly. The third thing, and very important thing, service availability. Most of the core services that AWS, from that, remember that big thing, most of the core services should be available in all the regions that AWS has. Some of the managed services that are newly launched or newly launched or quite a niche domains, they may not be available everywhere in the world. So you may want to check if the services that you want are available in that region or not, right? So you can check the AWS region table. With fullness of time, they should be available everywhere else. But if it's something that you absolutely wanted, please do check the region table. I've given a link on the slide. And lastly, but not the least, is the services pricing. Now, this is interesting, right? If you are running a production application, you have to take care of, application latency, compliance, data privacy laws. Yes, I have to check mark that. But if you are a developer, you're just testing, just playing around, uh, try and compare the AWS's pricing across regions. Now, AWS pricing is region specific. So there are some regions, because of how we work with local agencies and how the data centers are built and locally and the raw materials, etc. AWS regions have different kind of pricing. Okay, so every service will have the same set of ideologies of how they define the pricing, but every region will have different pricing for the same services, right? So, for example, US East may be more cheaper than the Mumbai region, and I've seen a lot of customers, if they would run production out of Mumbai, they would run their dev environments out of US East, so that they can use the cheaper cost for their dev environments. Now it's the quality of the infrastructure is same, everything is same. It's just that because of the uh, local infra, the prices differ, right? So if you're a developer, if you're testing, if you're just playing around, I would suggest you go in US East, play around in that region, because that is going to be the cheapest region for you to work with, right? US East 1, if not wrong. And definitely this is something that AWS launched recently. So originally AWS enabled all new regions by default, right? So you could access all the regions that AWS has. Now AWS disables any new regions for you, okay? And you have to go and manually enable that. This is a very good thing. I was hoping this would have been launched way ago, because what happens is, me as a person, I work in Mumbai region a lot. Okay, so I open my console, I only see Mumbai region. I work with my CLIs, only see Mumbai region, right? There could be scenarios where someone in your organization goes ahead and creates regions, creates instances in some other region. There has been an instance with a customer of mine many years ago, where someone in their team, by mistake, added the access key and secret key. These are credentials that you need to access with API or talk to AWS APIs, and they added those in the code, and that code was published onto GitHub, right? And within like minutes, some hacker or a bot picked it up, and they started creating these machines for in that customer's account in some other region. And the customer came to know about this like almost a day later, because the bill spiked, and they got some alerts, which was good that they had alerts, and they came to know that, oh, something like this happened. And this was way before a service called as CloudTrail was announced, right? So uh, this can happen. So if you're not using a particular region, just go ahead and disable it, because it will reduce a lot of headache for you. Security 101, this is very important. So when you get an AWS account, the first thing you do is protect your root account, because your root account has unrestricted access across, right? And there's no way you can limit the permissions on the root account. Okay, it's like the root account as in the email ID that you gave in the login, right? So that's called as a root account. So what we say is, first of all, do not generate any access and secret keys. You'll find them in the security credentials pane. Don't create if you're not created already. If it's created, just go ahead and delete it. um, then set up something called as AWS Identity and Access Management. There's a service called as IAM, Identity and Access Management. Go ahead and create users or groups or roles. If you are new and you just want to create a quick user like an admin, just go ahead and create that admin user. Create that user, give it the permissions like administrator permissions, and use this user henceforth to log into your account. Don't use the root account. It's a very, very bad practice, because once you start doing that, and when you go big, or if you're in a company and it just gets out of hand, like everyone has access to root, and then we don't know who did what, and there's no governance of what is happening in your AWS account, right? So always use IAM users, groups, and roles for daily access. For root and IAM, now users, for both of them, enforce MFA, multi-factor authentication. There's a lot of information about this in the IAM documentation, so I'm not going to run you how to do that. But these are the quick things: MFA, strong password policy, and rotate the credentials regularly. Like you have to ensure that, like how for our systems, right? Every 3 months we are asked to go and change our password for example, my Amazon systems, right? Every 3 months we are asked to change the password, and this is a very strong password policy. Like you have to have alphanumeric, you have to have a special character, you have to have multiple uppercase and lowercase characters as well. So ensure you do that. Last but not the least, grant least privilege. And this is not just for the policies for the users. This could be for anything and everything in AWS cloud, right? You have to ensure that you grant least privileges, only give access as much as needed. Okay, because it's easier to do that rather than giving everything and then trying to, oh, someday you get into a problem and you're like, what do I do? I have to now cut down people's privileges, right? So start with least and then keep adding as needed. The next thing that I want to talk is, I didn't mention something about AWS limits. So if you have a new AWS account, there are something soft limits and hard limits, right? So you will have certain limits on your account uh, in every service. And these are like guardrails set by AWS. See, we understand people are new to the cloud and maybe they have got the account newly, and by mistake they just started like 14 AWS EC2 instances. We will not let you do that, because uh, first of all, you will be charged for those 40 instances. And uh, when you're starting a new account, why do you need 40 instances, right? I mean, if you want to increase that limit, you just have to go to the right hand corner, say support ticket, and you can just raise a support ticket to increase that limit. But by default, we are not going to let you do that, because then if you're doing it by mistake, there has to be some way of stopping you from doing that and making you aware that you're doing something that you may not want to do, right? Quickly, purchasing options. I know I'm talking a lot and there's a lot of information. Come back, listen to the recording. It all may make sense, right? But there are different purchasing options. One we already talked about, on demand. I said like switch button on with electricity flowing, button off, everything stopped, right? So that may apply to multiple services from AWS. There is provisioned as well. So for example, you could say, you know what, I'm going to use so many of resources for next 1 year. Can you give me a discount? We have a provision for that, right? So if you commit to a certain resources, certain number of resources, we will give you back some discounts. The next one, sorry, that is reserve. The provisioned one is, for example, you say a service called as DynamoDB, right? It's a NoSQL service. So you could say, I want so many write units, capacity units, and read capacity units. I want 5 write capacity units and read capacity units. I need so much of storage. If you say that, the service will automatically charge you based on those five that you've selected. It doesn't matter if you use 2 or 2. It will charge you for those five capacity units. So you have to ensure that the units that you select are adequate. Obviously, there are a lot of other things you could do, auto scaling and all that, and ensure that you're priced accordingly. But in general, that is how provision purchasing option works. Now, many services will support multiple billing. So for example, I'll just give you an example of EC2. EC2 is like virtual servers in the cloud, right? So on demand, we already talked about. Any workload that you're just starting with, go ahead with on demand. Reserve instances, you could say, for a year or 3 years, I want this kind of instance. I am ready to commit. Now give me a discounted value. Savings plan is something we have launched quite recently, I think end of last year, and it's like a monetary commitment. It's similar to reserve instance, but more like a monetary commitment. You could say $1,000, $10,000, and it will add that savings plan into the system. So, and the last but not the least is spot instances, right? Before I talk about spot instance, reserved and savings plan, there's something called as AWS Cost Explorer in your AWS account. So you can actually go ahead and run your application for almost 2 months. I'm talking about production applications, right? Run this for 1 or 2 months. Don't reserve anything for 1 or 2 months, right? Don't just go and blindly reserve something or do savings plans on day one, because you don't know what kind of workload you're running. You don't know if it is enough capacity, if the instance type I've selected is it right or wrong, right? So just let it run for 2 months. let the recommendation engines that are set with returns and savings plan collect all that data of your usage, let it generate the recommendations and give it to you. So that happens in your AWS management console itself, and then you can go ahead and do all the reservation savings plans and takes the monetary benefits. The last but not the least, spot instances. uh, I like this topic a lot. I think I could spend an hour talking about spot instances, but what we I wanted to talk about spot is, it's think of it, it's like a spare capacity in the AWS data center that we want to give away in a cheaper rate, right? So 70 to 90% of discount from the on-demand pricing. Uh, we have given away bidding. A lot of people still think we do bidding. We have given away bidding for last 2 years. If you want to give an exam like solution architect associate or professional, you have to understand spot instances. So please do read up on spot instances. There's a lot of new features like advisor. There is a spot block, there's spot fleet, there's auto scaling and spot and diversification. There's lots of things you can do in spot now. uh, so please do read about spot. There's no more bidding. Okay. Then there is, I'm not sure how this applies to the accounts in Nepal for the free tier perspective, but I think the other two will apply. So there is three things, right? Always free, 12 months free, and trials. Always free is some services or some part of some services have some resources free all the time. Like for the lifetime of that account, these things are free. For example, the Lambda service that we talked about, like function as a service kind of a thing that we talked about, the Lambda service, it has 1 million free requests per month, right? And so you can run those per month, every month till the end of time. The next one is 12 months free. So this is like the free tier that we talk about. Like few resources in some services are free for the first 12 months that you've signed up for the account. Okay. This is for normal accounts that customers need. This may or may not apply to the educate account. So you may have to check with Anjani or Genesee on how these apply to you. And the last is the trial accounts, the trial offers, right? So for example, if you see, I forgot to mention the service name, but it's for Redshift, where for first 2 months that you sign up, like say, okay, now this is my 13th month or 14th month, whatever month I'm using AWS, and now I want to work with Redshift. The moment I say activate, for the 2 months from that day of activate, you'll get a free trial of Redshift. So you can go to that link, aws.amazon.com/free, and you'll find all the details. Great. So let's quickly run through a tutorial. I know I'm almost coming towards an hour. Let's quickly run through a tutorial. So I would like you to take a screenshot because it's a tiny URL I created. I should have named it well, but next time. So there's a LAMP stack on EC2, virtual service on the cloud, and RDS, relational database service. It's a managed service for MySQL. So this tutorial, it's quite long because it will teach you how to create VPCs, the subnets, the security groups, how to create EC2 instance, how to install PHP web server on the Linux machine, how to create an RDS MySQL instance, how do you connect the web server to the MySQL, how do you connect to the web server. So it will take you to the whole journey. It's very interesting if you want to learn about how to work with EC2, RDS, and all these things, right? So that is a tutorial to begin with. Okay, so this is a tutorial to begin with. So think of this as, once you've created this would be your dev environment. This is not the best practice. Okay, what is the best practice? Now think of all the things I talked about: multi availability zones, highly available, highly fault tolerant, and secure and scalable. I'll show you a quick insight into how this can be turned into a best practice. So take this as a stretch goal on that tutorial. Okay. So first thing is AWS. Yes. Let me just use this mouse, and this is AWS. It's a region. See if it's a region, and it has, for example, 2 availability zones. Okay. Then you have a VPC. So a VPC, a virtual private cloud, is an isolation for you in your account where you give it an IP range and it will create a virtual private cloud for that IP range. So it's a CIDR IP. You give that and it will create an IP range for you, and it is across a region. Okay, so notice how the boxes are aligned. Then you create subnets. Now subnets are nothing but small subsets of the VPC. So they will also have a certain IP range that you define. You would have two public subnets because two availability zones. Subnets are AZ specific. Okay, subnets are AZ specific. VPC is region specific. You would have public subnet. You would have private subnet. In short, a public subnet can have virtual machines that need to be accessed from outside. Okay, from outside as in from the internet. Okay, any EC2 instance, any web server, any load balancer that needs to be accessed from the internet must go in the public subnet. Then there is private subnet, whereas you don't want it to be accessed from outside. It can talk to each other within the subnets within the VPC, but not from outside. There's a lot of other things that you need to learn, like NAT gateway and internet gateway, but it's easy to learn. Just let's stick to the basics for now. Then you have something called a security group. There is two things. These are like firewalls. Okay, there are two types of firewalls. One is stateful and stateless firewall. Security group is a stateful firewall. Network access control is a stateless firewall. Remember this. If you're preparing for a certification, you have to remember this, and even for your day-to-day work with AWS, right? What we mean by security group is a stateful firewall. It means inbound and outbound access. So if you give the service that anything, this connection on port 80 is allowed to come in, it will remember that, okay, this request came in on this port, this connection, I should allow this connection to go out as well. So you don't have to explicitly also say that, port 80 for outbound, or that particular port for outbound. So if you have allowed in inbound, it will already be allowed for outbound. In a stateless firewall like NACLs, you have to allow and deny. So you have to say inbound, outbound, you both have to allow both the sides for this request to be completed. You can read more about security groups versus NACLs in the documentation. There's properly a tabular format of what are the differences. Good to learn for your certifications, right? Then EC2 instances. We already created those EC2 instances for the web server. So those are the EC2 instances I've created inside the security group. So notice I have two different layers of security group. One is for web tier, one is for database tier. Always have security groups for different tiers of your application. And security groups span across different AZs or different subnets. Okay, so you don't have to worry. So if I have to say, okay, port open port 8080, I just mention it in security group, and it will allow port 8080 to EC2 instances in both the availability zones. Or if you have 10 EC2 instances across different availability zones, it will allow across all. Okay, so it's one click, one place where you mention your security group or where you mention your firewall policies. Then as a stretch goal, do try auto scaling. Okay, it's a very interesting service. I started working with AWS when auto scaling was just launched, and to be honest, the way the service has evolved over the years, it's awesome. You should play with auto scaling and learn it, learn how to work with it, right? So it could essentially say, oh, to begin with, I just need two virtual machines, but if my demand of application increases and you see my CPU, average CPU is going up, just keep adding more virtual machines. It will do that. Okay. And of course, it will also remove it, so you don't pay a lot for extra capacity. We'll do a session on that someday. If you're interested, let me know. I would love to talk in detail about auto scaling and elastic load balancer and the best practices around that, how you can do that, because there's a lot of new features that have come out, and I would love to have a session on that. Last but not the least, you have a database instance. You must have already created RDS in the tutorial, so just go ahead and tick multi-AZ in there, and you will see another secondary signed up for that primary in another availability zone. And this is where the fault tolerance comes into picture, right? So quickly, I'm going to wrap up. The first is the dev tutorial. Your staging could be similar to what your production is, but your staging could be a smaller section of what your full-fledged production is, right? So if a production has 100 instances, your staging could just have maybe 2 or 10 instances, and you do your different kind of testing that you want to do on it. So that's the end goal. That's the best practice, right? So we started from just one, and then we keep adding these as a best practice. Cool. And notice how they have different VPCs and they're in the same account. You could have this in different accounts and different VPCs as well. Okay, so last but not the least, be prepared to take screenshots, or else just go ahead and watch the recording again. But there's a lot of things you can do. A lot of people come and say, oh, can I do the solution architect exam or the developer exam? It depends on what you've been doing. It depends on what you want to do further, right? If you're using AWS knowledge to enhance your career, right, you should already be doing certain activity, and then you add AWS knowledge and go forward in your career. So you can find these different learning paths. You can find the role based paths. You can find solution based paths. You can find specialty paths, like you want to do big data, or networking or security specialty. You can find these learning paths, and these are good because they have they'll tell you, okay, do this training, maybe do this exam, and you should be okay. So there are like general guidelines of how to go ahead with the learning. The second one is definitely go ahead and access developer center. My example was maybe too operations oriented, but there are a lot of examples of different languages, programming languages that you can look for in the development center. So go ahead, do that. You can also find a lot of samples on our GitHub page, and there's an awesome page I found just yesterday, that is awsworkshop.io, and this page has curated workshops from AWS and our partners. So there's like 14, 18 workshops there. And you can find different like ECS, EKS, AppMesh, and third party tools. You can find a lot of workshops in there. So you can access those, and just play around and see how much you can do out of it. Definitely, you want to start building on AWS. So, so if you see, getting started hands-on, getting started tutorial, getting started projects. So there's a lot of these different things on different use cases. And if you notice in the screenshot, it says free tier. So we also say that this hands-on workshop may be applicable in the free tier. Okay. The next one is, if you're not speaking, just go on mute, please. Thank you. Uh, the next one is definitely a learning library. There's a lot of still, I've tried to filter it out. So it's English, free digital training. There's 360 almost items. Have a look at it. Some good format over there. In the end, if you still want to do a lot more training than that, you want in-person training, definitely reach out to Anjani and his team, and they should be able to help you. Certifications. So there are different levels of certifications: foundation, associate, professional, specialty. Initially, we used to have a prerequisite. Then, if you want to do professional, you have to do some associate. That is not there anymore. Since 2018 October, that is not there. So if you want to go ahead and do professional, do it. While we recommend you should do associate first, see if you have learned enough, and then do professional. But if you think you're good enough, want to do just professional, go ahead and do it. The second important thing is, you can now do it from home, right? COVID situation, I don't know if it is a bad thing, but because of that, now we have moved everything online. So you can sit at home and do your certification exams from home. Okay. Last couple of slides left. So that is Machine Learning University. Have a look at it. If you're a machine learning enthusiast and want to do a lot more in that, I'm sure someone will also share a lot more information, but there's a website available, access that. We talked about events, AWS events, so feel free to reach out to us via these events as well. And I come to the end of my presentation. Just wanted to say thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know there was a lot of information that I shared. If you have any doubts, any questions, happy to answer these questions over Twitter, over LinkedIn, and we'll always be here to help you. So please go ahead, go build, and share your experiences with us. We'd love to know that we have helped you in a certain way. Thank you so much.